The first sign that Marcus Voss was about to ruin his own life came in the middle of his own farewell party. He stood beneath the warm lights of the rooftop lounge downtown, smiling like a man who had already won. Music played softly in the background. His colleagues held champagne flutes. The city glowed behind the glass walls like a postcard that belonged to someone else. Marcus raised his glass and tapped it with a silver spoon. "Before I go," he said, his voice carrying across the room, "there's one person here who clearly doesn't understand when he's out of his depth." A few people laughed nervously. They always did that around Marcus. It was easier than making eye contact. He turned, slowly, and pointed at Ethan Cole. "Ethan, I've given you 2 years. 2 years of mistakes, excuses, and misplaced confidence. Today is my farewell party, but it might also be your last night in this building. Security is already on the way." The room went silent. Ethan didn't move. He stood near the back of the lounge, one hand in his pocket, the other wrapped around a paper cup of untouched coffee because champagne had never sat right with him. His face was calm, but his pulse beat hard enough to hurt. Marcus smiled, enjoying the moment. He loved public humiliation. He fed on it like oxygen. Then Ethan reached into his jacket and held up a slim black flash drive. "Interesting," he said quietly, "because I was about to ask why your laptop had a folder labeled Sunset." Something shifted in the room. Marcus's smile faltered for half a second. And in that half second, Ethan saw it all. Not fear, exactly. Recognition. The kind that came when a man realized the wrong person had touched the wrong thing. "Put that down," Marcus said, his voice dropping. Ethan looked at him steadily. "No." A murmur spread through the crowd. The board members, the department heads, the accountants, the executive assistant near the bar, all of them suddenly looked less like a celebration and more like witnesses. Marcus took one step forward. "You don't know what you're doing." Ethan's expression didn't change. "Actually, I do." And then, before anyone could stop him, Ethan reached for the laptop sitting on the AV table, opened the hidden folder he had copied hours earlier, and said the words that would end Marcus Voss's career. "Let's show everybody what was on your computer." 2 years earlier, Ethan Cole had thought the Voss family company was just another place where hard work might still matter. He had been wrong. Northbridge Supply Group sat in a sleek glass building on the edge of the city, all polished stone and expensive furniture, and framed photos of smiling workers who never seemed to exist in real life. The company moved freight, managed warehouse systems, and supplied equipment to hospitals, schools, and manufacturing plants across 3 states. To anyone looking from the outside, it was a legacy business, one of those family-run operations that like to pretend they were built on values instead of money. Marcus Voss was the reason Ethan learned how ugly legacy could be. Marcus was the founder's only son, which meant he had inherited the company with the same entitlement other men inherited: land, watches, and anger. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and always dressed as if he had a meeting with destiny right after lunch. He smiled when strangers were watching. But the second the door closed, his face hardened into something colder. He thought respect was something people owed him just for existing. Ethan worked in compliance and operations audit, which meant he found the mistakes people hoped nobody would notice. He checked shipping records, warehouse logs, inventory reports, billing discrepancies, and contract approvals. He had a gift for details, which made him useful and, to Marcus, intolerable. The first time Marcus publicly embarrassed him was 3 weeks after Ethan started. It was a Monday morning. The conference room smelled like burned coffee and dry erase marker. Marcus had called a meeting to review an annual supplier contract. Ethan noticed a discrepancy in the numbers and spoke up. "Mr. Voss, I think the total on page 6 doesn't match the revised freight rate on page 4. If this goes out as written, the company absorbs the difference." Marcus barely looked at him. "Do you always interrupt with something irrelevant, Ethan?" "It's not irrelevant. It changes the margins by almost 6%. Marcus leaned back in his chair, clasped his hands, and smiled in a way that made Ethan's stomach tighten. 6%? He repeated. "That's what you're worried about? In a company this size? You think I built this place by sweating over pennies?" No one in the room moved. Ethan kept his tone even. You built this place by signing documents. Someone has to make sure the numbers are correct before you sign them. A few people glanced down at the table. Marcus's eyes sharpened. Someone has to, he said slowly. But it won't be you if you keep talking like that. After the meeting, Marcus made Ethan reprint the contract 7 times because, as he said, the font looked too confident. He made him stay late to reconcile spreadsheets that had already been reconciled. He called him into his office just to watch him stand there while Marcus took phone calls and ignored him. That became normal. Marcus humiliated him in front of vendors, blamed him for problems he did not create, and made it a point to use Ethan's full name whenever he wanted the rest of the office to feel the sting. Ethan didn't fight back. Not because he was weak, and not because he didn't know how. He stayed because his mother, Linda, was on dialysis 3 days a week. He stayed because his younger sister, Grace, had just been accepted into nursing school and kept apologizing for needing tuition help, as if it were her fault. He stayed because the health insurance at Northbridge covered most of his mother's treatment, and losing the job would mean turning every family problem into a catastrophe. So he swallowed the humiliation and kept his head down. At home, nobody saw how exhausted he was except his mother. Linda always knew. One night, months into the job, Ethan came in after midnight and found her in the kitchen with a cup of tea gone cold in her hands. "You look terrible," she said. "Thanks," he muttered. Dropping his keys into the bowl by the door, she tilted her head. "That bad at work?" He almost lied. Then he looked at her pale face, the careful way she moved now, the fatigue she carried like a second spine, and he couldn't. "He's impossible," Ethan admitted. "Marcus Voss thinks if he humiliates people long enough, they'll become invisible." Linda studied him for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. "Son," she said. "Men like that are never more dangerous than when they think they've found someone they can break." At the time, Ethan thought she was trying to comfort him. He didn't yet understand she was warning him. The company's internal politics were messy enough on the surface, but underneath them ran something darker. Marcus had taken over more control after his father, Robert Voss, suffered a stroke the year before. Old employees whispered that Robert never wanted Marcus to run the company alone. They said the founder had trusted his daughter, Hannah, more than his son. But Hannah had left the business years ago. Nobody seemed willing to explain why. Then one Thursday in late October, Marcus asked Ethan to come into his office after everyone else had left. The city outside had turned rainy and gray. The windows looked like smeared glass. Marcus was standing by his desk with his sleeves rolled up, a glass of whiskey in hand. "I need you to handle a transfer tonight," he said. Ethan frowned. "A transfer? My laptop and my backup drive need to be migrated before tomorrow's meeting. It is being useless. You're good with systems, aren't you?" "I handle compliance, not personal machines." Marcus took a slow sip of whiskey. "Don't be difficult. The files are confidential." There was a tone in his voice Ethan didn't like. Not just annoyance. Pressure. "I can help it prep the transfer," Ethan said cautiously. Marcus's eyes narrowed. "No. You'll do it now." Ethan should have refused. He knew that even then. But he was used to choosing the least disastrous path available. And Marcus was standing there like a man who would punish him for hesitation. So Ethan followed him to the office with the glass partition, where Marcus's laptop sat open beside a stack of unopened mail. The machine was still logged in. Marcus, distracted by a phone call, waved Ethan toward it and said, "Just move whatever needs moving. Don't poke around." That should have been the end of it. But when Ethan connected the backup drive, a hidden folder icon flashed for a split second before disappearing. He frowned. He had seen enough in compliance to know that hidden folders existed for only one reason. Somebody wanted the contents protected from the wrong eyes. He told himself not to touch it. Then he saw the name. Sunset. Something about it made his stomach tighten. Not because it sounded suspicious in itself, but because it sounded meaningful, personal, the kind of label someone used when they wanted to pretend the file was innocent. Marcus was still on the phone, pacing near the window with his back turned. Ethan clicked. The folder opened. What he found inside didn't make sense at first. Scanned documents, a legal memo, a revised family trust agreement, bank transfer screenshots, a copy of a will, A spreadsheet with dates, notes, and a column labeled Final Outcome. His mouth went dry. At the top of the list sat a file named H. Voss, Probate, Revision, Final, PDF. Haka, Voss. Hannah Voss. He opened it. The document was a revised inheritance agreement, transferring controlling interest in the Voss estate from the original trust into a new holding structure under Marcus's sole authority. Ethan read it twice, then a third time, because his mind kept rejecting the words as if they might rearrange themselves into something less poisonous. The signature at the bottom looked like Robert Voss's, but not quite right. The pressure marks were wrong. The alignment was off. Ethan had spent enough time with documents to recognize a forged hand even when it was a good one. Then he saw another file. Audio. 12-18. He clicked it. For a second, there was only static. Then Robert Voss's voice came through the laptop speakers. Strained and weak, but unmistakable. I never approved this. Marcus, stop. I said stop. Another voice answered. Closer. Harder. Marcus. Dad, listen to me. The old trust is a mess. The board won't support the company unless I clean it up. I am not signing anything while I'm medicated. You already did. The sound of paper shuffling. A chair scraping. Then Robert again, now breathing heavily. You told me this was temporary. Marcus's voice came back, low and sharp. It is temporary. For me, Ethan sat frozen, listening to a confession unfold in real time from a man who thought he had buried it. The recording continued for 2 more minutes, Robert insisting the signature was not his. Marcus getting angrier. Another voice in the background, a woman's voice, pleading for everyone to calm down, but too muffled to identify. Then a final line that made Ethan's skin go cold. Marcus said, If Hannah had stayed out of this, none of it would have had to come to this. The recording ended. Ethan stared at the screen. Marcus's voice was still drifting from the hallway. He had no idea Ethan had heard any of it. Then another file caught Ethan's eye. This one was a PDF of internal emails between Marcus and an outside attorney. The subject line read, Emergency Estate Restructuring. Beneath it was a chain discussing how to neutralize dissent before the annual shareholder review. Marcus was trying to steal his own inheritance. Not only steal it, rewrite it, hide it, use the company, his father's illness, and maybe even his father's medication to do it. Ethan should have closed the laptop and walked away. Instead, he copied everything. Not out of revenge, not yet. Out of instinct. The kind of instinct that told him the people who build files like this always assume no one will ever find them. He cloned the contents onto the backup drive, wiped the access log as carefully as he could, and slid the drive into his pocket before Marcus ended the call. You done? Marcus asked. Ethan closed the laptop. Yes. Marcus grabbed the machine before Ethan could step back. You looked at something. No, I didn't. You're lying. Ethan met his eyes. And for one brief second, Marcus looked almost amused, as if he were disappointed Ethan was not a better liar. Listen carefully, Marcus said, stepping closer. Whatever you think you saw, it stays between us. Your position here depends on your discretion. Ethan's jaw tightened. My position here depends on whether I continue to tolerate being treated like garbage. Marcus laughed once, but there was no humor in it. You think I'm the problem? Yes, Ethan said. That night should have ended with Ethan quitting. But it didn't. Because in the middle of all that horror, one detail kept pulling him back. Hannah Voss. He had only met her once before. She had come to the office in a dark coat, carrying a box of old files she had asked Marcus to forward to the probate lawyer. Marcus had been openly hostile to her, smiling too wide and speaking too softly, the way people do when they are trying to cut someone without leaving a visible wound. Ethan remembered her eyes. Not cold, tired. The next afternoon, he found her name in the corporate directory, then on a personal contact form buried in the old email chain. He hesitated for 3 days before calling. She answered on the second ring. Hello, Miss Voss? My name is Ethan Cole. I work at Northbridge. A pause. I know who you are. What's wrong? The question caught him off guard. There was no suspicion in it, just alertness. I think your brother is hiding something, Ethan said. Another silence. Then, quieter. How bad? Bad enough to end him if I'm right. She exhaled slowly. Meet me tomorrow. They met at a diner off the highway. One of those places with battered booths and coffee that tasted like regret. Hannah looked nothing like Marcus. Where he was polished and sharp, she was plain in a way that felt deliberate. No jewelry, minimal makeup, a wool coat worn at the cuffs. She listened to Ethan without interrupting once. When he finished, she sat back and closed her eyes. I knew it, she whispered. You knew? My father told me Marcus was pressuring him before the stroke. He said Marcus kept bringing documents into the hospital. He said he didn't feel safe signing anything because he was so heavily medicated. Her hands were trembling now, though her voice stayed steady. The board told me it was grief talking. My own brother told me I was trying to steal from him when all I wanted was the truth. Ethan pulled the flash drive from his pocket and slid it across the table. Hannah looked at it like it was a live wire. Did you copy everything? Yes. Is there enough to prove forgery? I think so. The metadata is strange, but the recording is the biggest piece. Your father says, Marcus pressed him. Her eyes filled, but she blinked the tears away before they could fall. He's been building this lie for almost 2 years. Why didn't you fight him? Hannah gave a humorless laugh. Because by the time I understood what he was doing, he had already isolated everyone. The board was afraid of him. The lawyers worked for him. And when my father got worse, Marcus convinced everyone I was unstable because I'd asked too many questions. She looked down at the flash drive. Now the question is what you want. Ethan didn't answer right away. What did he want? To expose Marcus? Yes. To make him pay? Of course. But beneath all of that sat something more fragile and more dangerous. Fear. If he did this wrong, Marcus would destroy him. Not just his job, but his mother's treatment, Grace's tuition, the fragile stability of his whole family. Men like Marcus rarely fell alone. They dragged everyone within reach into the mess. I need time, Ethan said. Hannah studied him, then nodded once. You're not wrong, but be careful. Marcus is planning something. Sure enough, Marcus was planning something. 2 days later, Ethan got called into HR for a surprise performance review. The woman from HR, Denise, looked uncomfortable before he even sat down. Marcus was not in the room, but Ethan could feel him anyway, as if his shadow had been left in the chair beside her. Denise folded her hands. There have been concerns about your reliability. Ethan stared at her. Concerns from whom? She looked at the paperwork. A vendor reported that you approved a shipment reroute without authorization. That never happened. There's a time. Stamped log. I'd like to see it. You'll have a chance to respond in writing. Ethan understood immediately. Marcus was building a paper trail. A false one. He was setting Ethan up to look careless, dishonest, maybe even corrupt. If the compliance guy had irregularities in his record, then who would trust him when he eventually made accusations of his own? It was elegant in the way only cruelty can be. That night, Ethan called the only person in the office he trusted, a senior accountant named Paul Rains, who had survived 3 different bosses and knew exactly how companies buried trouble. Paul listened, then said one thing that made Ethan's blood turn cold. He's clearing the room. What does that mean? It means Marcus is consolidating. He's firing people he doesn't trust before the annual review. If he's moving against you, he's probably doing it because he thinks you found something. I did. There was a long pause on the line. Then I hope you kept copies. Ethan almost laughed, but it came out bitter. I kept copies. Then don't fight him alone, Paul said. Men like that don't fall because they're guilty. They fall because the right people finally see the same thing at the same time. The problem was timing. Marcus announced his departure from Northbridge 3 weeks later. Officially, it was a promotion to a national executive role with one of the company's major partners. Unofficially, everyone knew he was leaving after successfully transitioning leadership. There were rumors of a farewell party, a tribute, a toast, maybe even a plaque. Marcus wanted applause. Ethan heard about the celebration from Brenda Lawson, Marcus's executive assistant, who looked like she had been carrying secrets in her purse for years. She stopped by his desk one afternoon with a stack of files and didn't leave right away. Don't trust the invite list, she muttered without looking up. Ethan glanced at her. What? Brenda shrugged. I said what I said. She was in her 40s, always impeccably dressed, always efficient, always one bad decision away from panic. She had the expression of someone who had learned to survive by becoming invisible. Brenda, Ethan said carefully, is Marcus actually leaving? She let out a short laugh. Marcus leaves only when somebody kicks him out. Then she leaned closer and lowered her voice. He's furious about something. He's been in meetings with legal all week. Also, he told security to be ready for tonight. Ethan felt his stomach drop. Tonight? Brenda's eyes flicked toward Marcus's office, then back to him. He said he wants a clean exit. That usually means somebody gets made an example of. She straightened her papers and walked away before he could ask another question. Ethan sat very still at his desk. A few minutes later, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Do not come to the party alone. No signature. But he knew who it was. Hannah. He typed back one sentence. I'm already bringing a backup, she replied almost immediately. Good. The day of the farewell party felt wrong from the moment Ethan woke up. His mother was up before him, sitting at the kitchen table in a robe, staring out the window at the pale morning light. You're quiet, she said. Ethan poured himself coffee. I'm thinking. That usually means trouble. He smiled despite himself. You taught me that too well. Linda turned to face him. Tell me what's happening. He hesitated. He had been keeping it from her because he didn't want to add fear to everything else she carried. But hiding things from Linda was nearly impossible. She had a way of reading his face like weather. There's a problem at work, he said carefully. A big one. With Marcus. He looked up sharply. Linda's expression changed just a little. Not surprise. Recognition. You know his type, she said. I've seen it before. Ethan sat down across from her. You have? Men with power and no conscience make mistakes because they think they're untouchable. She folded her hands around her mug. What kind of mistake did he make? Ethan looked at her for a long time. Then he said, the kind that can put him in prison. Linda didn't gasp. She didn't ask for details right away. She simply said, then be sure before you move. I am. Are you sure you're not doing this because you're angry? He thought about the humiliation, the public snide comments, the forced overtime, the way Marcus had smiled every time he tried to crush him. Yes, Ethan admitted. I'm angry. She nodded, unsurprised. Anger is useful if it points you toward truth. Dangerous if it points you toward revenge. That line stayed with him all day. By late afternoon, Northbridge's top floor had been transformed. White flowers lined the counters. A catering company had set out trays of shrimp, roast beef, and tiny desserts nobody actually wanted. Music drifted from hidden speakers. Marcus's farewell banner hung crookedly behind the bar. Ethan wore his best suit, a navy one he'd bought on clearance 2 years earlier because it made him look more like a man who belonged in meetings than a man who was borrowing space from people richer than himself. As he walked into the lounge, he saw the room had filled with exactly the kind of people Marcus loved. Board members in tailored jackets, managers with practiced smiles, vendors who laughed too loudly, employees who hoped being seen would keep them safe. Marcus was at the center of it all, radiant in his own vanity. He spotted Ethan immediately and smiled like a blade. There it was, the trap. For the first half hour, everything played out like a bad dream with expensive catering. Marcus made speeches. People applauded. Someone from finance joked about how much they'd miss his energy. Marcus laughed, gracious and grand, as if he had not spent the last 2 years turning the office into a pressure chamber. Then he toasted the future. Northbridge is entering a new era, he said, raising his glass. And as part of that transition, some people simply won't be needed anymore. The room laughed weakly, unsure whether it was a joke. Marcus's eyes found Ethan across the lounge. There are employees, he continued, who mistake persistence for competence. They mistake quiet for intelligence. They mistake being tolerated for being valued. He let the words settle. I don't like firing people at parties, Marcus said, but I do like clarity. So let's be clear. Ethan Cole, please come forward. The music had already stopped. Every face in the room turned toward Ethan. He felt his own heartbeat in his throat. His mother's voice echoed in his mind. Be sure before you move. Marcus smiled, almost indulgently. I've had enough of your insubordination, your mistakes, and your little obsession with numbers. Effective immediately, you're terminated. Security will escort you out, and HR will contact you about final paperwork. A few people looked away. Some looked fascinated. A couple looked relieved it wasn't them. Ethan didn't speak. Marcus interpreted the silence as surrender. I said, come forward. Instead, Ethan lifted his phone and asked, calmly, is the board ready for this too? Marcus's expression changed. What did you say? The board. Leonard Price. The legal team. Are they all here tonight? Or is this just the farewell act before the real meeting? That got people talking. At the far end of the room, near the balcony doors, Leonard Price stiffened. He was the board chair, older, silver-haired, and usually hard to read. Tonight his face had gone white. Marcus noticed the shift. What are you talking about? Ethan reached into his jacket and pulled out the flash drive. A collective inhale moved through the room like wind through dry grass. Marcus's voice dropped into something dangerous. Don't do this. Why? Ethan asked. Because the room is full of witnesses? Marcus took a step toward him. You have no idea what's on that drive. I know there's a recusnox my documents while you were pushing him to do it anyway. The room erupted into confusion. Someone whispered, What? Leonard Price stepped forward. Marcus, what is he talking about? Marcus's jaw tightened. He's inventing nonsense because he's bitter. Hannah appeared from the side entrance at exactly that moment. The room went even quieter. She walked in wearing a dark dress and carrying a leather folder. She looked at her brother with the kind of disappointment that didn't need to shout. Bitterness? She said. That's what you're calling it now? Marcus looked like he had seen a ghost. You, he said. Yes, Hannah replied. Me. The sister you told everyone was unstable. The one you cut out of the family trust while Dad was sedated. The one you thought would stay silent forever. Leonard Price stared at Marcus, then at Hannah, then back at Ethan. Someone explain this, he said sharply. Ethan plugged the flash drive into the AV table. His hands were steady now, almost eerily so. The adrenaline had burned away fear and left only clarity. Marcus lunged forward. Stop him. Security moved, but too late. The screen behind the bar flashed to life. The first file opened was the estate document. Gasps. Then the scanned signature. Then the emails. Then the audio recording. Robert Voss's voice filled the lounge. I never approved this. Marcus, stop. I said stop. No one spoke. Then Marcus's voice from the speakers. Cold and unmistakable. Dad, listen to me. The old trust is a mess. The board won't support the company unless I clean it up. People around the room stared in stunned silence. Another line. I am not signing anything while I'm medicated. You already did. A woman at the back covered her mouth. Then Robert again, weak and furious. You told me this was temporary. Marcus, on the recording. It is temporary for me. The sound of the room changed after that. It was as if everyone had remembered how to breathe at once and now could not decide whether to inhale or run. Marcus's face had gone pale. You edited that, he snapped. No, Ethan said. I copied it from your laptop. The one you left open while you were too arrogant to think anyone would touch it. That's illegal. Hannah let out a bitter laugh. You forged my father's signature. Don't start whining about legality now. Marcus turned on her. You were never loyal to this family. You made loyalty impossible. Leonard Price stepped closer to the screen, scanning the emails with growing horror. He was a cautious man, the kind of board chair who always hoped somebody else would handle the mess, but even he understood what he was seeing. These are real, he said quietly. Of course they're real, Hannah said. We've been trying to warn you for months. Marcus looked around the room, desperate now, and desperation was ugly on him. This is a setup. Ethan shook his head. No, it's a mirror. Marcus pointed at him. You stole my private files. I found your private crimes. The words hung in the air. A woman from accounting, one of the few who had always looked at Marcus with quiet contempt, said softly, Oh my God. Marcus spun on her. Stay out of this. But nobody was staying out of it now. The board chair asked for the AV to be paused. Marcus shouted over him. One of the security guards moved forward, uncertain whether to protect Marcus or restrain him. Brenda Lawson stood near the bar with her hands pressed together over her mouth, tears gathering in her eyes for reasons no one could yet understand. Ethan clicked to the next file. It was a bank transfer sheet showing payments from a Northbridge account to a private legal trust connected to Marcus's divorce attorney, his real estate LLC, and a shell company registered to a consulting firm that did not appear to exist beyond paper. Then another file, then another. Each one showed a different piece of the same pattern. Marcus had been draining company resources, manipulating the inheritance structure, and using his father's illness as cover to seize control before the board, or Hannah could stop him. The room had gone from shock to fury. Leonard Price turned slowly toward Marcus. "Is this true?" Marcus didn't answer. That was answer enough. "Hannah," Leonard said, voice shaking now. "Why didn't you bring this to me sooner?" Hannah's face tightened. "Because the first time I tried, Marcus threatened to sue me, cut me out of the estate entirely, and ruin anyone who helped me. Then he started making sure every lawyer in his orbit told the board I was emotional, unstable, and grieving too hard to be trusted." She looked straight at Marcus. "You used Dad's last months to steal a company and erase your own sister." Marcus barked out a laugh that sounded more like panic. "You think this ends with a folder? You think one recording ends me?" Ethan looked him in the eye. "No," he said. "The recording doesn't end you. It just starts the part where other people finally stop protecting you." At that moment, Brenda Lawson crossed the room. The whole lounge seemed to hold its breath. She stopped beside Ethan and held out a manila envelope. Marcus stared at her. "Brenda." Her voice trembled, but she didn't step back. "You told me to prep the termination packet for Ethan." Marcus said nothing. "You also told me to file the revised board minutes after the vote that never happened," she continued. "And you told me to delete the old trust drafts from the shared drive." His eyes narrowed. "Give me that envelope." Brenda's hands shook. "No." The room watched in disbelief as she opened it and pulled out printed screenshots, correspondence logs, and a notarized statement she had already signed with the legal department that afternoon. "I couldn't keep doing this," she said, now crying openly. "You told me to lie to the board. You told me to move money through a vendor account. You told me your father had approved everything, and then I saw the medical notes." Marcus looked as if she had stabbed him. "You traitor." Brenda's mouth tightened. "Your employees are not your property." It was one of the most powerful sentences Ethan had ever heard in his life. Marcus took a step toward her, but security moved between them at last. That was the moment Leonard Price made the decision everyone else had been too afraid to make. "Shut the party down," he said. "Now." A stunned silence followed. Then the board chair turned to Marcus and said, with a voice cold enough to freeze the room, "You are suspended effective immediately. Your access badges are to be deactivated tonight. Legal will meet you in the morning. Do not leave the city." Marcus stared at him in disbelief. "You can't do that." "I just did." Marcus's lips curled. "You'll regret this." Leonard didn't flinch. "You should have thought of regret before you forged your father's signature." It was over. Not instantly. Not cleanly. Men like Marcus do not disappear in one breath. They resist, threaten, deny, and try to claw back a story that no longer belongs to them. He shouted that Ethan had stolen his laptop, that Hannah had been plotting since her father's death, that the board was blind, that the company would collapse without him. Nobody listened, because once the truth is in the room, lies become embarrassing. Security escorted Marcus out through a side hallway while the party stood frozen behind them. His voice echoed once, then faded, then was gone. And in the strange silence afterward, the room looked smaller, less glamorous, more honest. Ethan didn't feel triumphant. He felt exhausted. Hannah came to stand beside him. Her eyes were red, but her chin was steady. "You did it," she whispered. "We did it," he corrected. She nodded. Once. Across the room, Leonard Price was already speaking with legal counsel on speakerphone. Brenda was sitting in a chair with her face in her hands, but there was relief in her posture now, the kind that comes only after years of strain have finally broken the surface. Someone had shut off the music. The city outside still glittered as if nothing had happened. Cars still moved below. People in other buildings were still eating dinner, closing deals, arguing about parking tickets, making plans to call their mothers. The world had not stopped for Marcus Voss. It had only stopped protecting him. The consequences came fast after that. By morning, Northbridge's outside counsel had frozen Marcus's access to all company systems. His expense accounts were suspended. His authority was stripped pending a formal investigation into fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and document forgery. The board filed emergency paperwork to preserve records, and the old trust documents were handed over to an independent forensic accountant. 2 days later, the first local business article hit the internet. By the end of the week, Marcus Voss was no longer a rising executive. He was a scandal. The story spread because people love the collapse of a powerful man almost as much as they love his rise. But what mattered to Ethan was not the headlines. It was the call he got from his sister Grace the night the news broke. She answered on the first ring and immediately yelled, "You did not tell me you were sitting on a corporate crime bomb." Ethan laughed for the first time in weeks. "Hey, I was trying to keep it together." Grace was silent for a second, then her voice softened. "Are you okay?" He looked around his small apartment, at the cheap lamp, the stack of unopened mail, the quiet that had felt heavy for so long, and now felt different. "I think so," he said. "Mom is crying," Grace said. "Happy crying. She keeps saying she knew you were built for something bigger than that man's nonsense." Ethan swallowed hard. "How is she?" "She wants you home this weekend. Says she's making roast chicken and won't take no for an answer." That made him smile even more. "Tell her I'll be there." The board later offered Ethan a formal apology and a promotion into a newly created compliance director role, along with an independent review of the internal culture Marcus had poisoned for years. Some employees left anyway. They had lost too much faith. But others stayed, because once the rot was cut out, they wanted to see if the place could grow back into something decent. Hannah took over interim oversight of the family trust and redirected part of the inheritance into the scholarship fund her father had originally wanted. She also donated a portion to employee medical support, a quiet act of justice that felt more meaningful than any speech. As for Marcus, the law did what the law does when enough evidence piles up. Investigators traced the forged documents, the embezzled transfers, and the false reports. His attorney withdrew. His promotion vanished. His name was removed from the company materials. Civil charges followed, then criminal ones. He tried to claim he had been misunderstood, but the recording of his father's voice was impossible to misunderstand. People asked Ethan later whether he enjoyed seeing Marcus fall. The honest answer was no, not exactly. What he felt was something harder to name. Relief, yes. Vindication, yes. But mostly a deep, tired sorrow that a man with so much power had chosen to spend it, making everyone around him smaller. Marcus had not merely broken rules. He had broken trust, family, dignity, and a father's last years for money he already would have inherited. That kind of greed is not dramatic when it's happening. It is administrative, quiet, paperwork and signatures and polite lies. And that is what made it so dangerous. Months later, on a Sunday afternoon, Ethan sat with his mother and sister in the kitchen while rain tapped against the windows. Linda served the roast chicken she'd been insisting on for weeks. Grace complained that she was too busy studying to come home enough. Ethan told her that guilt was not a substitute for family and got a tomato thrown at him for his trouble. Their laughter filled the room in a way it hadn't for a long time. Linda looked at her children, one by one, and smiled softly. "You look lighter," she told Ethan. He thought about that. Maybe he was. Not because revenge had given him peace. Revenge never did. But justice had changed the weight of things. It had returned ownership of the story. It had proved that endurance was not the same thing as surrender. Later that night, after Grace went to study and Linda fell asleep on the couch, Ethan stepped outside onto the porch and looked out at the wet street shining under the lights. His phone buzzed. A text from Hannah. Dad would have liked how this ended. Ethan stared at the message for a long second before replying. Not the part where it happened, but yes, the truth. Her response came quickly. That's the only part that matters. Ethan put the phone away and leaned against the railing. The air smelled like rain and cut grass, and the faint, distant promise of a summer storm. For 2 years, he had endured a man who thought humiliation was a form of power. In the end, Marcus Voss lost everything because he made the oldest mistake in the world. He mistook silence for weakness. And when the moment came, when the lights were bright and the room was full and he believed himself untouchable, the quiet employee he had tried so hard to crush stood in front of everyone and told the truth. That truth cost Marcus his career. It gave Ethan his life back. And for the first time in a very long time, that felt like justice.